guys, and welcome back to another true crime and makeup time video. If you're new here, my name is Zara and I post a new true crime video every single week. So if you love makeup and you love true crime, definitely turn on your notifications so you don't miss any of my videos every week. And leave a comment down below saying hi if you're new to my channel or if you have any cool case suggestions. So today's case is about this brutal home invasion, and one that I stumbled across just reading an article and I got really hooked into it. It's really scary how people can just target you out of the blue. Now today's case, it started off just like with a simple trip to the grocery store, but it turned into a greed for money, a sick sexual desire, and then honestly something that ended in a panic, but that led to tragedy. If that doesn't make sense, let's just get into it and talk about today's case. Now, if you look up Cheshire, Connecticut, it's known for two things. So one is the bedding plant capital, and then the other is for these murders. And when it took place, it was such a horrific event that it actually, essentially, it sent shockwaves throughout this small community. Now, before this took place, Cheshire was just your, typical New England town. There were really like large, attractive homes on super well manicured streets. The town had several public parks, lots of tennis courts and a community pool. And it's actually a really beautiful place to live. The photos look, incredible. Now, this is the kind of place you'd want to raise a family, and that's what a lot of people dreamed about, as this being their like ideal suburb, people that live close by. If you, drive through all the streets in the neighborhood, you would see these beautiful homes and you'd think about the families that actually live inside them, and you'd probably be like, oh my God, they are probably living the life. And I think here in Australia, we have a similar kind of area, at least in Victoria, and it's known as Toorak. And it's a bit different because it's like super rich. Like Toorak is like $40-50 million homes. Like it's fancy. And I remember like we drive through that a lot because like we go through that area a lot, but I'm just like, dang, like who lives inside these homes? Like you see these homes and it's like 17 bedrooms. And I'm like, but for what? Like, what do you need 17 bedrooms for? You know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, how big are the bedrooms? So I'm always curious about who lives inside these homes, like what type of families are in there, or is it just one person? It's so interesting. Now, one of these families, lucky enough, or you could say blessed enough, or you can just say they worked really hard, to get to live in this community. And one of these families was the Petit family. Now, the Petit family was a close-knit family who seemed to have it all. They had a ton of family portraits up in their house, showing photos of them smiling. They were beautiful. They were, living their life to the fullest. And it kind of just looked like you could just tell that they were a close family. In 1985, William Petit Jr., he actually met his wife Jennifer when he was doing rotations as a third-year medical student, and they were actually working at the same hospital. She was working as a nurse and he was a student, and he liked Jennifer as soon as he saw her. Like as soon as he saw her, he was like, oh my God. And he was trying to impress her when he first met her, and he was trying to show her like, this is how you take blood pressure and things like that. And she was a nurse and she's like, I already know how to do that. And she was patient with him, even though she felt like, well, she knew that his technique that he was showing her was all wrong because he was still a student. But, she let him kind of like show off a little bit. And then she was like, all right, well, this is how you do it. Like really, like the right way. Jennifer was a pediatric nurse, and once William finished his studies, he went on to become an endocrinologist. And that's just a doctor that deals with like hormones and, like metabolism and diabetes, things like that. Anything that affects your hormone levels, that's what they deal with. So Jennifer and William went on to get married later on, and they actually had two daughters. Their first daughter was Haley, born in October of 1989. And their second daughter, Michaela, was born in November of 1995. That's a pretty big age gap, huh? Like 6 years. So now soon after Michaela's birth, unfortunately, Jennifer, she was actually diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, the illness. And they had only been married for like, a decade or so at this point. And their oldest daughter, Haley, she was only 9. But just the way that Haley was, she was so determined to help her mother in any way that she could. So at the age of 9, actually, she began writing a ton of letters and requests to her family and friends asking them to sponsor her for the annual Connecticut MS Walk. And she named her team Haley's Hope. And every single year for 7 years, Haley, participated in this walk and raised over $55,000, I believe, in the fight for MS. Now, Haley's personality, she was really quiet, but very determined and very smart. She accomplished a lot by the time she was 17, but she was so modest in her personality and just the way she was that no one would really even know about her achievements if you didn't say anything. When Haley was small, William would actually take her to hospital with him during his rounds, and she would just observe everything and really be interested in everything William was doing. And, following this, not surprisingly, Haley, she actually wanted to follow in her parents' footsteps and get into the medical field. In September of 2007, she planned to attend Dartmouth to study medicine. Now, Michaela, their youngest daughter, she looked up to Haley, like her older sister, 6 years older than her. And she planned to follow in Haley's footsteps and take over the MS walk when Haley, went to college and was no longer able to do so. And she was actually going to call her team Michaela's Miracle. Michaela was known for her really thoughtful and gentle nature. She was just a really sweet young girl. And she was popular with not only her school friends, she was actually really popular with the teachers too. They all loved her. And she really enjoyed cooking, but she also loved spending time in the garden with her father, William. Now, William, together with his wife, Jennifer, they just loved the girls. They loved their little family and they were really close with each other. But, growing up, William and Jennifer, they worked really long, hard hours to be able to provide the lifestyle that they were living for their children and for themselves. They would, travel to the best destinations. They would go to the finest restaurants and they lived in this amazing neighborhood. But friends say they were never cocky or arrogant about the money that they had. They were kind people, but they were really just more focused on their family. That's what was important to them. I mean, and you can kind of tell this from how the girls were raised and how they behaved. They seemed to just really not think much of themselves in that kind of sense. They weren't better than anyone. I mean, when I was younger, my dad would literally have to force me to go to work with him if no one could watch me. And I was so bored, sitting there, having to read through affidavits or something. I was like, what am I going to do here? I was literally sitting there, why am I here? Hating my life. So the fact that they, loved spending time with their parents and stuff says a lot, I think, about the way that they were raised. Now, on July 22nd, 2007, it was a Sunday and it was just another normal weekend for the family. And Michaela, remember, she loved to cook. So she decided that she was going to cook dinner for the family that night and give her mom a break. So Jennifer and Michaela, they go to the grocery store together that afternoon because they want to obviously buy the ingredients for what Michaela would need to cook dinner that night. Now, little did they know that as they were browsing the aisles of the grocery store, planning, what next ingredient they needed, they caught the eye of a man named Joshua Komisarjevsky as Jennifer and Michaela were walking, down the aisles, picking out their ingredients for their family dinner that night. Joshua was kind of following them and texting his friend Stephen Hayes with a plan that he hatched. He didn't look away from the girls and he continued to watch them and follow them even as they went out into the car and put their groceries into Jennifer's car. He noticed that Jennifer's car, looked expensive, and he could tell just by looking at them that, this family was probably a wealthy one. As they got in their car, put the groceries in, they got in, they're driving to their house. He actually followed them all the way to their home and he just sat in the car just watching them. Now, Joshua, he was actually a local resident at the time, and he had been driving through the streets of Cheshire, the neighborhood at least, with his girlfriend and just daydreaming about the lifestyle and the way that they lived in that neighborhood. He fantasized about, his future and making a life for his family there one day. He, would tell Caroline, one day one day we could be here, and he was fantasizing about which home he would stay in and, what area and which pool, and basically just looking around and like daydreaming about living in the same area that he had just stalked the girls into. However, he would ultimately go on to cause so much destruction and inflict so much pain onto another local family, the same kind of families he was dreaming of being one day. Now, meanwhile, it had been a normal summer's day for the Petit family. William, Jennifer, and Michaela attended their regular Sunday church service, and then after this, William went off to play golf with his father. And after the grocery store, Jennifer and Michaela planned to head to the beach. And Haley, she had actually been with her friends at another beach and was planning to come home for dinner that night. So the family was just having a regular weekend. Michaela ended up making pasta for the family for dinner. And then Jennifer and the girls watched TV in the living room after dinner. And William, he actually fell asleep in the sunroom on the couch over there after dinner. Now, Joshua, that man who was stalking them in the supermarket, he was 26 years old, so very young. And he was actually adopted as a baby and homeschooled as a child. And he was actually very intelligent, but he was in and out of jail a lot because he just got into a lot of trouble with the law. And most of it was for burglary, and he actually didn't want this type of life for himself. He wanted a better life. He wanted to better himself. He actually wanted to become an architect one day, and that was mainly fueled by the birth of his daughter in 2002. Around this time, he actually gained full custody of his daughter because her biological mother, she was in and out of rehab for a drug addiction. And once he gained full custody of his daughter, he actually didn't live with his daughter. His daughter went and lived with his parents because he couldn't really care for her. So the year this takes place, 2007, he began dating a woman named Caroline Meisel, and she was only 18 at the time. However, their relationship became pretty serious pretty quick, and they were even contemplating marriage together. However, Caroline's parents, they actually didn't approve of this relationship with Joshua because he was a career criminal. He wasn't going to do anything good for his daughter. And he also considered Joshua to be a pedophile because his daughter was so young. And his daughter, Caroline, she also really looked young. Like, she didn't look 18. So he felt like, oh my God, you only like my daughter because she looks so young. And this was the same girlfriend that Joshua was driving through the streets of Cheshire with, contemplating and dreaming about this better life. Stephen Hayes, remember the man that Joshua was talking with on the phone at the supermarket? He was 44 years old at the time, and when he was young, his parents actually got divorced, and he grew up with his mother and his two brothers. His family states that Stephen was manipulative from a really young age. He had two brothers, Matthew and Brian, and his brother Matthew states that he was pretty violent at a really young age. And once he actually taunted him by pressing a revolver at the side of his head. Stephen was also, allegedly very controlling and had a habit of passing the blame onto others for anything that he did wrong. And he would claim that, he was sick and suffering from psychological problems, but his brother Matthew was like, Stephen was not sick. He was just very cunning and manipulative. Stephen also had a daughter with his wife, and she was born in 1992, and her name was Alicia, and they would, eventually get divorced later on, but Alicia's mom had full custody of her. But Stephen saw Alicia regularly, and I think he saw her weekly. Alicia would go on to say that her father was super nice to her. He was never ever mean to her. He never even raised his voice at her. And she had never ever just seen a violent side to him. He was like the loveliest man to her. Stephen had also been to prison multiple times, and he actually met Joshua when they both attended a halfway house in 2006, just the year prior. And by this time, Joshua had been arrested for 18 home invasions, and he also suffered with a drug addiction. It was a meth addiction. Stephen, on the other hand, was a recovering crack addict, and he was actually his crimes had everything to do with car theft. He was also a burglar, but he stole from cars. And both of them were actually on parole at the time when this case takes place, because they'd both served prison terms again for burglary. and then they were released in April of 2007. Joshua had originally been charged with 12 counts of burglary and sentenced to 9 years in prison. And this happened in December of 2002, but he was paroled after just 5 years. So both of them, at the time this takes place, were actually on parole. Now, Joshua, after this, he came to live near Cheshire, and Stephen went to live with his mother. And like I said, Joshua actually initially wanted to get his life together. He wasn't trying to be a criminal, for the rest of his life. And him and Stephen actually had a plan on starting a business together even. They were gonna try and be contract workers, but then nothing ever really came of it. They never did anything with that. And, they were both at the time not in good situations. So Stephen was living with his mother, and his mother didn't even want him living with her at the time. She was like, I need you to just leave and get your own, life. And she wanted him to also stop using her car, because I guess in and out of prison, and then he's just living off his mother, So she was threatening to kick Stephen out. And Joshua, on the other hand, had custody of a daughter that he couldn't even take care of. He had a new girlfriend who, parents didn't approve of, and he was trying to give her a better life. He had a meth addiction, and neither of them actually had a plan for a better life. They both didn't have full-time jobs. They both struggled with addiction, and they also just didn't have much money. Joshua's girlfriend, Caroline, she actually ended up going back and living with her family during this time because they just didn't have enough money to support each other, and Joshua was trying to figure it out so that she could come back and live with them. Now, Joshua and Stephen were both getting desperate, and like we all know, this is not a good combo. Now, Joshua, although he had, been to prison several times for burglary, he was actually a pretty skilled burglar. So he contacted Stephen, when he saw Jennifer and Michaela at the grocery store, and he was like, hey, do you want to make some fast and easy cash? Stephen was obviously sure. So Joshua and Stephen, they ended up meeting and coming up with a plan that they were going to sneak into the Petit household and steal from them. They were hoping to get some cash and maybe, some expensive pieces of jewelry, and then that was that. Their plan was to tie up the family, rob them, and then just make a quick getaway. So they actually conducted a test run. They broke into a random home. This was their test run of let me show you how easy it is to break into a home. So Joshua breaks into this home, just a random home they picked, and he stole very little things from this home. And then he, got in and got out. And his main goal was just to show Stephen look how easy it is, because Stephen at that point was only stealing from cars. So when Stephen saw how easily and how quickly Joshua got in and out of the home, Stephen was sold. He was like, let's do this. So the night of July 22nd at around 7:45 p.m., the two of them begin texting each other, with Stephen beginning the text conversation. Stephen says to Joshua, I'm dying to get started. I might need a margarita soon. And then an hour later, Stephen again messages Joshua we still on, because he hadn't heard from him. Joshua just responds with yes, and then Stephen responds with soon, when are we going? And Joshua says, I'm just putting the kid to bed, hold your horses. And then Stephen responds with, dude, the horses want to get loose, or something like that. And he's like, lol. So clearly, Stephen was eager to get going, and I don't know if it was just the nerves. Maybe he was really nervous because it was his first sort of, home burglary essentially. So anyway, back to the Petits. Like I said, William, after dinner, he falls asleep on the couch in the sunroom, and the girls, they continue watching TV in the living room. Then at around 11 p.m., the girls, they head on up to bed, and William, he just stays on the couch in the sunroom because he was like, I'm already here, I'm comfortable, I'm just gonna stay here. Michaela got into bed with Jennifer, and Haley went into her room for the night. Now, William, he woke up again at one point in the night, but he was like, I'm just going to stay here because Michaela and Jennifer are sleeping in my bed and I don't want to wake either of them. So he decided to just remain on the couch that night. Now, the plan to rob the Petits was already discussed between Joshua and Stephen, and now all they had to essentially do was put it into motion. So Joshua and Stephen, the plan that they sort of believed was that the two of them, they were going to rob the house, and then they were going to take the family, bring them out to the car, tie them up, and then they were going to burn the house down to just destroy any evidence. And, nobody was supposed to get hurt. That was not the plan. So they didn't want to waste any time anymore now. Like they, needed their cash. So that night at around 3 a.m., they put their plan into action. Now, this was only hours after they saw them at the grocery store. So that night, Joshua and Stephen at around 3 a.m., they break into the Petit home and they are armed with a gun. And then they also find a baseball bat in like one of the neighbors' yards. So they take that with them as well. So when they enter the home, they find William laying on the couch in the sunroom. And for some reason, when they see that, they abandon their plan of not hurting anyone, and then they immediately hit William over the head with the baseball bat. Joshua then tells William, like, hey, don't panic. We're just here for some money. Joshua then asks William, like, where is the safe in the house? William then responds, like, there is no safe. And Joshua and Stephen then, like, don't know what to do. So then they tie up William, like, they tie his ankles and his feet together. And then they just leave him on the couch. Like he's bleeding from the head at this point. So Joshua and Stephen, they then make their way up to the bedrooms where they see Michaela in bed with her mother, Jennifer. They tied Jennifer's wrists and ankles to the bedposts. And then they put a pillowcase over her head. And then they take Michaela, they drag her into her own room, and then they do the same thing to her. They then go to Haley's room, they find Haley, they do the same thing to Haley. Now at this point, they keep reassuring the girls, like, we're just here for money, like we're not going to hurt you, we just want the money. So they go downstairs again and they make a beeline for William, who at this point is still bleeding out from the wounds to his head. And so they untie him and then they force him down into the basement at gunpoint. And then once he's in the basement, they tie him to a pole in the basement just by his ankles. And then they like cover him with like multiple blankets. Now, William at this point was like severely like losing a lot of blood and he was just drifting in and out of consciousness. And I just feel so bad for him because he probably felt so helpless. Like he was the only man in the house, and he couldn't protect his girls. And it must have just been so difficult for him. So Joshua and Stephen, they then go around the house, like ransacking it, trying to find anything, like any type of money, anything valuable, essentially. And they were just looking around, like hoping to find some cash or something like that. And they didn't really find much, but they did find some bank statements. Now, these bank statements showed that the Petits had around $36,000 in their Bank of America account. Now, unfortunately, because they found this is when the plan changed. I guess the amount of money to them was a lot. So now they decided like, okay, we need to like wait until the bank opens, which was at 9 a.m. And then we're going to get this money that way. So they were just going to wait till the bank opened, take Jennifer, like drag her essentially to the bank, make her withdraw the money, and then they were going to win. Now, guys, it was like hours till the bank even opened. Hours. It was like 3, 4 in the morning. 5 hours. So their plan was just to stick around and terrorize the family until they could get what they wanted. Like now, before they, had their bank plan, Stephen, he drives the family's car, by the way, to the gas station and he grabs 2 plastic like containers and he fills both of these containers up with $10 worth of gas each. So then this took up some of the, hours. And then he drives back to the home. He drops off the gas containers. And then that's when he's like, all right, it's time for to take Jennifer to the bank now. Once they're at the bank, Stephen tells Jennifer, go out and withdraw $15,000 from this account. Now, Jennifer obviously just agrees. And I can't even imagine what the conversation would have been like on that car ride between Jennifer and Stephen. Like, how scared she must have been. Maybe he was promising her, like, we're not going to hurt your family. Like, we just want the money. Maybe he just kept telling her, false promises or what he believed was the truth. And the weird thing to me that I don't understand about this, and maybe this is just wrongly reported, but they had $36,000 in that account. Why would they only ask her to take out 15? Were they literally like, oh, we just need 15. Like, we were just going to do 7.5 each. Like, we don't need the 30K. Like, there was 36K in there. Like, I feel like there must be, maybe they didn't want to draw suspicion by withdrawing so much money. Do you guys know if at the time there were like bank limits? Because I know in Australia, you will have to pay like a fee if you want to withdraw more than $10,000 from memory, something like that. Anyway, so Jennifer, she gets to the bank. She approaches the teller and she's like, okay, I need to withdraw some money. And as she's arranging for this $15,000, she quickly leans over to the teller and she like hands him a note. The teller like glanced at the note and then quickly, without even hesitating, just goes and like passes the note on to his manager. The bank manager then looks at the note and then quickly runs into her office. Like no communication, nothing. Jennifer then, goes back to the car. She gets in it and she makes her way back to her house with Stephen and the money. Now, amazingly, as Jennifer was literally leaving the doors of the bank manager was in the back calling 911. She calls at approximately 9:21 a.m. and she's telling the dispatcher, like, this is what happened and this is the description of the car and this is what Jennifer looks like and this is what Stephen looks like. The manager also told the dispatch like what they were wearing and things like that. And apparently on the note that Jennifer gave the teller, she had written down that, the men that were holding them hostage were being nice and all they wanted was money. During this time, Joshua's back with the family at the house and Jennifer had no idea what was happening to her family during this time. Now, shortly after this call was made by the bank manager, police were immediately dispatched to the house and they were in unmarked cars and they quickly set up perimeters around the house and were like casing the house. And officers then hid in trees or like behind trees near the house, but not too close where they would like draw attention. All right, so now it gets pretty brutal. So skip past, or if I'm editing this video, I'll try and put a timestamp so you can skip. But, you would think that the police being there is a good thing, but there's quite a bit of controversy regarding the police's behavior and actions in this moment, because at this point they're setting up perimeters around the house. And as they were doing this, they're, I guess, setting up like blocks and stuff around the house and on the roads. But as they're doing this, Joshua is inside the home, little Michaela. And he was doing this while she laid tied, like, hands to the bedpost, feet to the bedpost, tied to her bed. She was 11. Keeping in mind he had a 5-year-old daughter, and Michaela was 11. So then, after he was done, that wasn't enough. So he grabs his cell phone and he begins taking intimate photos of Michaela while she's tied to the bed. So anyway, he then goes downstairs and he finds that Jennifer and Stephen have returned from the bank, and he like grabs his phone and he shows Stephen, like, look what I did to Michaela. Like, and he was showing the pictures of Michaela on his phone. And he's like mocking Stephen, like, why don't you do the same thing to Jennifer? Like, kind of like taunting him, like, you're not man enough if you're not going to do it. So for some reason, and I don't know, this bloody happens often, Stephen's like, oh yeah? So then he like pushes Jennifer down to the ground in the living room and he begins being Jennifer. Joshua then like laughs and, he got what he wanted essentially. I guess he wanted Stephen to commit a rape too. That's what I believe. He didn't want to be the only one doing it. But then Joshua, he laughs, he leaves the room, and then he goes around the house. And then when he returns back to Stephen, he tells Stephen, William's escaped. And that's because Joshua went and looked in the basement and then he realized William was no longer tied to the pole in the basement. At this point, when Stephen hears this, he loses it and he goes and he looks outside one of the windows and he realizes, oh my God, that is a police car. Like, he can recognize that it's an unmarked police car. And for some reason after that, as Jennifer lay on the living room floor after being assaulted, he puts his hands around Jennifer's neck and then he strangles her to death. Like, oh my God. Now, meanwhile, what happened to William was that he managed to untie himself and get himself free. And he found like an escape through the bulkhead in the basement. And that's how he wiggled himself out. Now, William at this point, remember, he was like hit by a baseball bat multiple times over the head and over his body. So he was pretty badly like beaten and bleeding. So he stumbled across onto his neighbor's driveway, like he was barely able to even breathe, let alone speak. And initially, the neighbor didn't even recognize William because he was covered in blood. The neighbor then, calls 911 as well. I'm guessing they didn't realize that the police were already there setting up the perimeter. But a police officer, one of the ones already there, then walks up to William and sees him. Now, the police officer walks up to him with a rifle, and William's like, what the hell? Like, he can barely speak, but he's trying to tell the officers, like, my wife and my daughters are in the house, like, they're being held hostage. Now, back inside the home, oh my God, Stephen had already killed Jennifer. Like, it was too late. It was done. And for some reason, he then begins to pour gasoline all over Jennifer's dead body. He then pours the gasoline over as much of the home as he can with what little gasoline he has. He then, goes up to the bedrooms where the girls are, and they're still tied to their beds with the pillowcases over their heads. And he pours gasoline all over their bodies. They're alive. Stephen then sets fire to the gasoline through one of the exits, and then him and Joshua attempt to flee the scene in one of the Petit's cars, but they, barely make it down the driveway before they crash into one of the police barricades that had been set up. They were obviously arrested immediately, but guys, the fire was lit. By the time the firefighters even arrived at the house, the complete top floor had been engulfed in flames, and that's where the bedrooms were, and it was too late. 3 people were found dead in the home. Jennifer was strangled, and burned in the living room. Haley and Michaela had died upstairs due to smoke inhalation. And the most horrible thing is that Haley, she managed to escape her restraints, like get out of the bed, and she crawled to the top of the stairs, but that's where she passed out and passed away. Michaela was found still tied to her bed. She was so little. Michaela was 11 and Haley was 17. Now, like I said, they were both, arrested immediately. And while they were in custody, the both of them would blame each other. Like, he did it. No, he did it. Joshua admitted that he was the one who followed Jennifer and Michaela from the grocery store. He said, the reason he targeted them was because they looked wealthy and they had a nice car. He admitted to hitting William over the head with the baseball bat and then 11-year-old Michaela, which let me say alone pisses me off so much, purely due to the fact, of course, because it was, but purely due to the fact because he also has a daughter. Like, that makes me, ugh. So, but when it came to burning the house down with the girls still inside, he said, no, I had nothing to do with that. He tells, the detectives that was all Stephen, and he even said to Stephen, like, you can't be serious that you're going to burn these 2 girls alive. But he says he didn't do anything to stop him. Stephen then recounts his version, and he says, yes, I took Jennifer to the bank. Then I came, we came home, I beat her, I raped her, I strangled her. And then I doused, her body with gasoline with Michaela and Haley still inside the home. Now, as to who lit the match for the fire, the reports actually vary, and they both of them just blame each other. Stephen says that after Joshua showed Stephen the pictures that he had taken of Michaela on his phone, and then after that, when he saw the police in the unmarked cars outside the home, is when he just snapped and he lost control. He also said, he doesn't blame Joshua for what happened, and that he takes full responsibility. He blames himself. He says, regardless of what actually happened and the way that everything ended, the only goal that night for him was to get money. Now, originally, the 2 of them, they agreed to a plea bargain, which would give them life in prison without the possibility of parole. But when the defense presented this, plea to the prosecution was like, no, we don't agree, and both men should be receiving the death penalty for this horrific crime. In Connecticut, this meant that both men would need to have a trial with a jury. Now, Joshua's trial began on October 13th, 2011, and during his trial, he stood by the same things he said during his confession, that he never intended to kill anyone that night. That was not the plan. He then made a statement saying, "I will never find peace within. My life will be a continuation of the hurt I caused. The clock is now ticking and I owe a debt I cannot repay." The jury, obviously, sentenced Joshua to death. But Joshua, even though he was like accepting the blame, he then appealed his sentence, saying that the prosecution painted him as being the mastermind, behind the crime. Like he was the one that did everything, when in fact that was not the case, like according to him. He stated he never meant to kill anyone, and it was actually Stephen who did all of that. Stephen who lit the match, Stephen who poured the gasoline, it was all Stephen. But the judge essentially was like, no, you both are responsible and you both fucked up, essentially. Stephen's trial began on October 18th, 2020. And Stephen's attorney actually said, giving Stephen a life imprisonment as opposed to death penalty sentence would actually be worse for Stephen, because he would have to live out the rest of his life with knowing what he had done to this family. He, would be tortured every day by his actions. But the jury was like, no, you deserve the death penalty, which to me is funny because essentially the jury gave Stephen what he wanted. Like, unless it was a manipulation tactic, like give him life in prison, like it's worse, but if it wasn't, then you gave Stephen what he wanted. He wanted to die. He didn't want to live with himself, knowing that he had done this to a family. In December 2010, Stephen actually apologized to the remaining members of the Petit family. He said, "Death for me will be a welcome relief, and I hope it will bring some peace and comfort to those who I've hurt so much." Stephen never even made an attempt to appeal his guilty verdict or his sentencing or anything like that. He claimed he was very sorry for what he had done, and he just didn't want to keep fighting, appealing, and putting the family, what was left of them, through any more pain. However, in 2015, the men's sentences were changed from death to life in prison because the state actually abolished the death penalty. So now Stephen and Joshua are going to be spending the rest of their life in prison without the possibility of parole ever. Which, I don't know, is that a good thing or a bad thing, you guys? Like, I'm so conflicted. Sometimes I'm like, death is scary, yes, but it's also an end, whereas life in prison, like, they will never, ever have a free life. But then at the same time, some prisoners have stated that life in prison becomes their life, and they're like, this is my life now, and they're actually happy with it. So I don't know. What do you guys think? So now there are a lot of issues in this case. There was a lot of controversy because one of the questions or issues is, why was Josh ever out on parole during this time? His previous defense lawyer for the burglary charges prior also stated that Joshua was very ballsy. The fact that he was willing to break into people's homes while they were in the house proves that he wasn't afraid of getting caught. He wasn't afraid of confrontation, which is very scary because can you imagine a burglar coming into your home and then he comes across you and he's just like, well, what are you going to do about it? Like, he's not even afraid that you're there. He would even break into the homes of police officers, or when he would break into the homes of other people, he would go into the bedroom, where they were sleeping, and just put his ear next to them and listen to them breathing. So he was much more sick and twisted than just being a thief who was trying to gain, from the robberies. His own lawyer said that Joshua was very smart and he would need to be watched very closely. He said that Joshua may even be a genius and would just figure out ways to manipulate the system. Jesus fucking Christ. He even stated that Joshua might be a genius and may be able to manipulate the system even more. Now, this recommendation by his own defense attorney should have been sent to the parole board, but it never was sent. And the reason why that's important is because when he comes up for parole, this should be in his statement, the type of character that Joshua was. In the sentencing transcript for his previous crimes, Joshua was described as a calculated, cold-blooded predator. They also said he had a mental abnormality or a psychiatric problem that needs to be addressed immediately. And all this being on his paperwork, but the parole board still released him. So whose fault is that? The parole boards or the people prior to the parole who aren't sort of vetting all the information that should have been processed? Joshua had been previously arrested for 18 home invasions and burglaries, and all of this information, including, his defense lawyer's essential characterization of him, was never presented to the parole board. And I don't understand how, because the parole board has one job. One, to determine whether members are safe enough to be released on parole into society. Like, yes, you can say, well, this wasn't sent, this and that, but shouldn't the parole board, I don't really know how it works in America, but shouldn't they at least, there's court records of everything. Like, he's been charged with these crimes. Why isn't this information and transcripts being taken by the parole board? Why aren't they doing their due diligence before releasing people into the public? Gather all the goddamn information, do your job. Instead, what the parole board saw was just this young, intelligent man who was so remorseful for his crimes, and he literally did it a month after being released. Same thing with Stephen. I mean, his criminal history was also extensive, but he was also out on parole at the time. They didn't, believe he was going to progress from robberies to murder. And I mean, at least his defense lawyers didn't. But I mean, I feel like the desperation and the fact they don't have jobs and things like that should also be taken into account as to the characterization, the mental health of someone. Like, all of this should be assessed. And I know maybe we don't have the resources for it, but like, what are we going to do? Just allow it to happen? Allow these things to escalate? Like, it's such a hard situation. Now, in 2019, from what I read, Stephen, he appears to now have been either undergoing or undergone gender transitioning. He claims that he's always known that he was a female from a really young age, and now he wishes to be one. Now, on top of all of this, police. People are pissed at the police and the way that their response was for this case. They were right outside the home prior to anything escalating. First, people don't understand why the car that Stephen and Jennifer were driving home from the bank in was never aggressively pursued or stopped, or, like, they didn't save Jennifer in that instance when she was not at the home. The police were already at Jennifer's house by the time Jennifer and Stephen arrived home, so they beat them there. Why didn't they stop Stephen from entering the home back with the hostages? Why didn't they save Jennifer at that moment? Why didn't they, just like do something in the moment? Like, that's what a lot of people are questioning. If they had separated Joshua and Stephen, maybe these three women wouldn't have died. It probably would have put them in a more compromised situation where Joshua would have had to surrender himself, because now he's by himself. He doesn't have an accomplice, right, to decide what to do next. Now, when William escaped into his neighbor's driveway and the police approached him, he could see police standing in behind the trees. And then a few minutes later, his house burst into flames. Now, officers arrived at the house like 9:30 a.m. Remember, the 911 call was made at 9:21 a.m. They arrived at 9:30 a.m. and the house burst into flames at 9:57 a.m., which means police had been there for nearly 30 minutes setting up perimeters, but not doing much else. And 30 minutes isn't a really long time, in my opinion, but there's been a lot of controversy regarding that time period. But police were apparently not aware of how many hostages were held in the home or how many perpetrators. And they would have probably been given, instructions from their higher ups to not be aggressive and just to observe the situation and fall back, essentially. So since these murders, William, he gave up his career as an endocrinologist, and he now manages the Petit Family Foundation in honor of his late wife and daughters. The main goals of the foundation, as per their mission statement, is to continue to raise and distribute funds to fulfill our mission to help educate young people, especially those with interests in science, to help support those with chronic illnesses, and to help protect those affected by violence. I can't imagine how hard it would have been for William to just not only move on with his life, but just to survive. But he found love again when he met another woman named Christine Paloff. She was actually volunteering for his foundation, and the two of them got married in August of 2012. They now actually have a son together who they've named William as well, and they continue to dedicate their lives to the Petit family. This is one of the worst cases for me, you guys. Honestly, this family was destroyed. Happy family, loving family, destroyed, and their life was taken away so brutally with such evil intent and so suddenly, and that's really, really hard for me. I mean, being an 11-year-old when he has a 5-year-old daughter, like Joshua, just don't they think of their kids when they're doing this? Like, Stephen also had a daughter, and Stephen's daughter would have been Haley's age at that point, around that age at least. And these two men, even though Stephen comes across as really apologetic, if he really was the one to light the fires, then they are both intensely dangerous, scary men. And I'm so glad they're never going to be released. Hopefully no other laws change. The worst part for me, I think, in this whole case is that the police were literally right outside, and these men, they were going to get caught no matter what. They didn't need to do what they did. How do they not realize things like this? Why do they escalate to the point where they make their crimes 100%? Like, you've committed 50% of the crime. You're already terrible. You've robbed, you've, terrorized, you've tried to burgle. Leave it. Why murder? They could have left the family alone, and they literally maybe wouldn't have gotten life in prison. Maybe they would have gotten a little bit less. And I know that's not a good thing because they would have been released eventually, but maybe they would have had a chance to rehabilitate something, figure it out. Like, this could have gone really bad. But no, they took it to like 100. Why kill, in a panic? They took away 3 lives for 0 gain. They didn't even walk away with anything. They destroyed their own lives together with William's life and these 3 poor women's lives. So annoying. And let me know your thoughts on today's case down below, guys. Have you heard of this story before? Really is a horrible one, and hope these things just don't happen. And I know you can't make that happen, but I wish I could. Keep safe, you guys. Be aware of your surroundings, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks for watching. Besitos, guys. Bye.